Hi guys, my name is Ollie. I'm a final year medical student at the University of Warwick on the graduate entry programme. Last week I put out a video on my top 5 tips for achieving a perfect personal statement. This week we're covering the other side of that, 5 mistakes that you should avoid at all costs in your personal statement when applying to university. Mistake to avoid number 1 is logistical problems. Let's get this one out the way. Let's open this video by agreeing between us that logistical problems should be completely off the table. What I mean here is submitting late, not paying attention to word or character counts, and not giving yourself enough time to plan and get that precious feedback. As I record this video, we're now about a month away from the UKCAT application deadlines for medicine, dentistry, and veterinary sciences. If you've not yet had a conversation with the person that's going to be processing your UKCAT form, that's going to be writing your reference and reviewing your personal statement, you need to be having that conversation now or as soon as possible. I recommend making a shared plan on exactly when your first draft will be looked at and when you will receive feedback by, when your second draft will be looked at and when you will receive feedback by, and especially when that final hand-in is going to be made. Get that in writing, get it set in stone. Next, I would have a look at the specification for the personal statement. UKCAT lays out extremely clearly what you're meant to be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. 47 lines of text, 4,000 characters. Whenever you ask for feedback, give all the relevant guidelines to your reviewers, because not only does it give them some valuable context with which to work, it makes them more likely to spot mistakes that you won't see yourself. Mistake number 2 is using lots of flowery, poetic language in your personal statement. Now don't get me wrong, I am as big a fan of complex literature and being flagrantly and needlessly verbose as the next guy, but sadly your personal statement is not the right place to be waxing lyrical on the finer points of the universe and human philosophy. An admissions tutor is not going to be impressed by complicated writing. They are instead going to be impressed by good writing, and those are two very different things. Or at the very least, what I mean to say is that just because your writing is complicated doesn't mean it's good. Complex words and ideas and phrases are simply a tool to make writing that is already good better. And this is one of my real bugbears, guys. There is nothing worse for me as a reviewer than when it becomes apparent that an applicant is using a word or a phrase where it's quite clear that they have no idea what it means or the context in which it should be used properly. And people often get caught out by the fact that just because 2 words appear similar, they appear to be synonyms or they might appear in the thesaurus next to each other, they're actually not always directly interchangeable. Language just doesn't work like that. An example of this might be famous, well-known, and notorious, all of which really mean the same thing. Examples of this might be famous, well-known, infamous, and notorious, 4 words which more or less mean the same thing, that very many people will have heard of this person or thing, but 2 of them are positive and 2 of them are very negative. So essentially all I'm trying to get at is do not use phrases where you're not 100% sure that you're using them correctly, or at the very least ask someone to check. And the other element to this before we move on is that we simply don't have the luxury of free space in our personal statement to be using these complicated phrases. Keep it concise, keep it punchy, and make your points as effectively and efficiently as you can. Tip number 3 today, guys, is do not mention specific schools. This again potentially is one of those more obvious points, but you absolutely should not be making it clear which school is your preference. And you certainly shouldn't be mentioning any specific school by name. If, for example, you're applying to 4 medical schools, 2 of which use cadaveric dissection and 2 of which don't, you should not really be talking about the value of cadaveric dissection and how excited you are to do it during your medical course. Save that for the interview stage, when that sort of comment likely will land a lot better and make a lot of people happy. You could instead, for example, talk more about anatomy and how excited you are to learn more about the inner workings of the human body, of muscles and joints and how they all work together. At the personal statement stage, keep it general so that it applies to all the schools where you'll potentially get a place. Of course, just to play devil's advocate, it may well be in some circumstances that you are only applying to a single school. In graduate entry medicine, that's not massively uncommon. And you actually could turn that to your advantage. You're essentially saying that, look, your school is the only pathway available to me right now that will help me achieve what I want. Here is why you should pick me. I am committed to your school and your school only. In that situation, it might work for you. But in the more general case, if you make it clear to the reader that you're not either 100% committed to a particular school, or they get the sense that you would rather go somewhere else, then they are simply better served by offering that place to someone else and chucking you in the bin. That's just the way it goes. But you know what you shouldn't chuck in the bin? This YouTube channel. If you found these tips helpful, guys, if you want to see more content like this, I'd really appreciate you throwing me a subscribe. It helps me grow the channel, which is one of the best ways that I can help keep it free. Share it with a friend too if you're feeling super generous. Now, mistake number 4 to avoid is grammar and spelling mistakes. Similar to what I was saying before about the importance of language and your language being correct, there is a real need for your spelling, punctuation and grammar to be absolutely spot on. In the real world, of course, no one really cares. Everyone is a lot more lenient. But for the purposes of your application, and if I were thinking about this from the point of view of an admissions tutor, this is a not very long piece of professional writing. It's less than a side of A4 that you have potentially had months and months to prepare. And that means that if the basics aren't right, you know, full sentences with a clear and coherent structure and proper grammar, that's really not going to look very good. I realise that this may be very difficult, genuinely, for some people for good reasons. If you have a condition like dyslexia, or you've simply not been exposed to much literature growing up, that presents an additional challenge that many people won't have to deal with. But the problem is with that is that even if a reader acknowledges that about you, I think the evidence suggests that seeing something that appears to be poorly written still invokes a negative response, even in the knowledge that there were reasons why it might be poorly written. This is why it's more important than ever with things like this to have other people check your work and check it makes sense. For example, if you fit into some scenario like that, if there is a reason why your work may need more checking than someone else's, send it to me. I will happily review your personal statement for you and I will give you priority when doing so. I appreciate that some people need that help more than others. In the general case, either way, it needs to be slick, and the people around you are going to be the people who help you get it there. And then mistake number 5, and my least favourite thing to see when reviewing personal statements, is that they have handed me a CV. Once again, I recommend checking out my previous video on this because I cover this in some more detail, but a personal statement is not a CV. A CV is a CV and a personal statement is a personal statement. Think of your personal statement as more like a covering letter that you would provide for a job application. That goes alongside your CV, and its role, its job, is totally different. In fact, the goal of that covering letter of your personal statement is in fact to tell me things that are not immediately apparent from your CV. If we're thinking about our classic point, evidence, explain structure, the CV really only supplies the evidence part. It doesn't tell me really anything about you. It tells me about something that you've done or something you say you've done, but it doesn't tell me how or why you came to do that thing, what you learned, or what the consequences are going to be, which are actually the things that I'm interested in. For example, if someone writes, I got an A in my A-level biology, great, so did thousands of other people. If you go, yes, I was head boy for a year, well, you know, great, every school has one of those, we've got plenty of those to pick from. The thing that you really need to get across is all of your achievements are really important, but why should anyone care? That's the issue at play here. For example, if you said something like, look, I was getting really poor grades in my biology classes, I was getting D's, E's, U's regularly, owing to some set of circumstances, or maybe I just wasn't working hard enough. But eventually I worked up the courage to ask for help, I asked my friends, I asked my school form tutor or whatever, then I worked my arse off every night, and then I ended up getting a B in the final exam, 2 grades above what I was predicted. That's actually a lot more interesting, and it's that wider context that I would want to know about. But if you then went on to say something like, I am now capable of spotting my own limits academically, I know when I'm about to struggle or I am struggling, I know how to ask for help and am confident I could go through that process again, and I know how important that is not just for my own well-being, but for the success of my team and the well-being for others on my team, then you are really on to a winner with something like that. And that's the kind of thing that I love seeing when people send me personal statements. So there we go, guys. That wraps up another episode on this personal statement series. I hope you've been finding it useful. If you have, I'd really appreciate you leaving a like on the video, commenting, and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss future updates. Once again, you can find me at Ollie Burton Med on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and of course right here on YouTube. So if you want to support the channel, guys, there are 3 ways you can do it. The first is by leaving a comment, a like, and subscribing to the channel. You can buy me a coffee using my Ko-Fi link, which will help keep me awake during the editing process. And then lastly, you can use my referral link to save 10% off your first year of Complete Anatomy 2020. And I'll get a small kickback when you sign up for a year. Take care, and I'll see you next time.